Good evening. I'd like to call the regular meeting of March 28th, 2022 to order. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, for all. Will the secretary please call roll?
Commissioner Alderete,
Here.
Commissioner Calderon,
Present.
Commissioner McLaughlin,
Here.
Commissioner Ramos, Commissioner Wu,
Present.
Vice Chair Pham, Chair Morrissey.
Here.
Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you. Before we begin, I would like to remind my fellow commissioners to turn your microphones on when speaking and off when not speaking. And when speaking, please place the microphone about 4 inches away. Members of the public may attend Planning Commission meetings in person or virtually via Zoom. I now invite the Commission Secretary to describe the way the public can access and participate in the meeting.
This meeting is being live streamed via our portal, www.santaana.primegov.com/public/portal, and to YouTube, www.youtube.com/City of Santa Ana videos. If you would like to provide a public comment, you may do so in the following ways. Join the meeting via Zoom, entering meeting ID 868617222227. When the item that you would like to comment on is being discussed, select the hand icon to let us know you'd like to speak. You will be called upon by the name you entered. If you'd like to join us by calling in, dial 669-900-9128. Enter meeting ID 868617222227. When the item that you would like to comment on is being discussed, press *9 to let us know you'd like to speak. You will be called upon by the last 3 digits of your phone number. After you are called upon, you must press *6 to unmute yourself. For those who are attending this meeting in person and would like to provide a public comment, please fill out a request to speak form and turn it in to the secretary. All speakers will be given 3 minutes to speak. You will be alerted when your time is up.
Moving on to public comments on non-agenda items. Secretary, does anyone wish to speak?
If you are attending this meeting in person and would like to comment on this item, please fill out a request to speak form and turn it into the secretary. If you are participating via Zoom and would like to comment on this item, please select the hand icon and unmute yourself. If you are calling in and would like to comment on this item, please dial *9 and press *6 to unmute yourself. I will wait a few seconds. Chair, we do not have any speakers.
Thank you. Moving on to consent calendar items. Is there a motion to approve item A, minutes from March 14th, 2022, and we will vote separately on excused absences. We'll start with the minutes. I do have a question on the minutes. It appeared, and I wanted to confirm this with Commissioner Wu, that we limited the retail sales to midnight. I didn't see that reflected in the minutes.
Do you mean for the GoPro project that we had at the last meeting?
Yes.
We can look at the resolution and rectify the minutes if need be.
They got 2 resolutions approved, one to sell alcohol until midnight. And then they have the second CUP that allows them for the after sale hours, which is until 2 a.m. So those are reflected in the resolutions.
The after hours, with the retail sales, the intent, and correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner, was to restrict the on-site retail sales to midnight.
Correct, yes. And that is
And-
reflected in the resolutions. It's from 7 a.m. to midnight.
Okay, I
And
apologize,
the
I
other
didn't see
was
that.
consistent with existing other laws or regulations.
Okay. Anybody like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I second.
Madam Secretary, can we get a roll call vote?
Commissioner Aldereti,
Yes.
Commissioner Calderon,
Aye.
Commissioner McLaughlin. Thank you for clarifying that. Commissioner Ramos, Commissioner Wu,
Aye.
Vice Chair Pham,
There was no changes to minutes. Aye.
Chair Morrissey.
Aye.
Motion is approved with Commissioner McLaughlin abstaining and Commissioner Ramos absent.
So we will hold the motion on excuse absences, see if Commissioner Ramos
Yes, she has informed us that she will be late.
comes shortly. Okay, that concludes the consent calendar. Moving on to the business calendar. I'll go through the public hearing protocols. I'll now review the process for public hearing so that everyone knows what to expect. First, staff will provide a presentation and answer questions from the commission. The public hearing will be opened. Then the applicant will be given the opportunity to speak, limited to 15 minutes. Then members of the public will be given the opportunity to comment, limited to 3 minutes. The applicant will then be given the opportunity to respond to comments made by the public, limited to 5 minutes. Then the public hearing will be closed. And the discussion will return to commission for formal action taken to approve, conditionally approve, deny, or continue review of the application. Please consider the following suggestions when organizing your comments. Please state your name and address, which is strictly voluntary. State whether you support, oppose, or are neutral to the proposal. And your statement should include all pertinent facts within your knowledge. Avoid gossip, emotion, or repetition. A clear, concise, and non-repetitive argument is most effective. The first item on the business calendar. This is the time and place for the public hearing on item number 1 for the property located at 2221 North Heliotrope Drive. Please note the decision on this matter is final unless appealed within 10 days by any interested individual or party. Before we begin, do any commissioners have anything they wish to disclose with regards to this item? Let's start with Commissioner Aldereti.
I have no disclosures.
Commissioner
Nothing to
Calderon.
disclose. Oh, sorry.
Commissioner McLaughlin,
Nothing to disclose.
Commissioner Wu,
Nothing.
Vice Chair Pham.
No disclosures.
And I have nothing to disclose. And now staff member Pedro Gomez will now provide a brief presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. This first item, I guess the only item on tonight's public hearing agenda, is a request for approval of conditional use permit 2022-06 to allow the construction of an accessory structure in the rear yard of an existing single-family residence. Pursuant to section 41-232.5 of the Santa Ana Municipal Code, accessory buildings more than 15 feet in height or more than 1 story require review and approval of a conditional use permit by the Planning Commission. The recommendation is for adoption of resolution approving the conditional use permit number 2022-06 as conditioned. Staff does want to note that the original public hearing notice cited that the building proposed would be at a height of 23 feet and 4 inches. Since the public hearing items went out, staff received concerns from neighborhoods, and staff worked directly with the property owners and their architect to reduce the proposed height of the structure approximately 20 inches. So now the proposed height is going to be a total of 21 feet and 8 inches. The property's address is 2221 North Heliotrope. It's located in Floral Park on the southeast corner of Santa Clara Avenue and Heliotrope. The general plan designation is low density residential. The zoning is single family residence, R1. It is surrounded by single family residences in all directions. The lot size approximately 0.9 acres or 39,500 square feet. And then the site is developed with a two-story single-family residence, approximately 5,700 square feet in size, listed as landmark on the Santa Ana Register of Historic Properties. It was listed in 2003. This slide just shows a couple of site photos of the single-family residence. You can see that these are from Heliotrope, looking east towards the single-family residence. These are also of Heliotrope. And just a little bit of site background for the commission. The house was built in 1938, 1939. It was constructed by Allison Honer. In 1955, the site was improved with a freestanding one-story pool house or cabana built by the then owner, E.M. Hall. In 2003, the property was listed on the register and listed as landmark and dubbed the Maharaja House. In 2004, the garden house that's currently on the site was built by the current owners. This garden house was reviewed and processed administratively in 2003. It did not require review by any sort of discretionary body because it was considered an accessory structure, no more than 15 feet in height, and did not physically alter the Maharaja House. The proposed project is a freestanding pavilion, approximately 205 square feet in size and 21 feet and 8 inches. The proposed structure would be located at the south end of the property, approximately 60 feet from the front or west property line, and 25 feet from the rear or south property line behind an existing 6-foot high stucco wall. The pavilion would be located approximately 65 feet from the existing residence and approximately 55 feet from an existing freestanding one-story garden house on the same property. The height of the residence is approximately 25 feet, while the tallest point of the pavilion is proposed at 21 feet, 8 inches. The additional structures on the site, including the pool house and the garden house, are about 13 feet for the pool house and 15 feet for the garden house. Just a little bit more information about the structure. The pavilion is currently built in Vietnam in the traditional Vietnamese design, and it was fabricated by Vietnamese artisans. The structure is proposed to be disassembled, shipped to Santa Ana, and reconstructed on this subject property. The pavilion would share similar design, materials, and cultural characteristics as the existing garden house, including prefabricated wood post members, traditional Vietnamese hand-carved wood details, and ceramic roofing tile. The structure would include 2 electrical outlets and limited accent lighting, including 2 to 4 light fixtures within the structure and 3 to 6 landscaping uplights at the base. We have conditioned the project to prevent direct glare into adjacent dwellings. Currently, there's no noise sources proposed on the pavilion. And for the commission's reference here on the screen, we have the proposed site plan. We have an enlarged view of the actual pavilion. And then this is in relation to the site. You can see that the dotted lines represent the property line. The hashed structure here represents a 2-story single-family residence. And then this red boundary shows the pavilion proposed approximately 55 feet to the wall. And then I think it mentioned 55 feet from the residence. But as you can see on the drawing, the width and the depth of the pavilion would be approximately 15 feet, 4 inches, and then 17 feet, 9 inches. And then the square footage would be 205 square feet. Each side of the pavilion would be exactly the same and would be typically about 6 feet wide. This is the proposed elevations of the pavilion. You can see the dimensions provided by the architect of the features of the pavilion. And then here we have more detail about what the characteristics of the pavilion would show, including ceramic roofing tiles, the hand-carved wood details, and then some lighting information. And then for more reference, this is an elevation in comparison to the approximate height of the Maharaja House. Again, the approximate height is about 25 feet for for the 2-story residence. And then the pavilion is proposed at 21 feet, 8 inches. And then for the project analysis, staff determined that the installation of the proposed structure would not result in the change to the existing land use. It still remain as a single-family residence. The proposed structure has been designed to be located away from adjacent properties to minimize privacy concerns and the visual impacts. The construction of the proposed pavilion will not result in a change to the neighborhood character or identity. And existing landscaping and mature trees are not proposed to be removed or altered. To ensure that the existing landscaping conditions are maintained, staff is recommending a condition of approval requiring that the trees be preserved and protected in place. In addition, the proposed structure will contribute to the already eclectic character and identity of the site without negatively affecting any of the adjacent residences or the site's existing historic structure. The structure would not detract from the overall historic significance of the property. The pavilion would share similar design and materials and cultural characteristics as the existing garden house already approved on the site. The installation of the pavilion would not result in any physical alterations to the historic structure, and the residence will continue to retain all of its character defining features. The structure would not impact any of the view sheds to the Maharaja House along any public perspectives. And then the overall design and massing of the new construction will be compatible with, but differentiated from the historic building in keeping with the required historic standards. To ensure that these conditions are met, staff is recommending the following conditions of approval to ensure that it's not detrimental to any adjacent property owners. The pavilion shall be limited in size to the 205 square feet proposed, 21 feet and 8 inches in height proposed, and shall be limited to the proposed location. Lighting within a structure or any sort of landscaping lightings shall adhere to nighttime shutoffs of 10 p.m. to prevent light intrusion onto neighboring properties. Lighting shall be arranged to prevent direct glare into adjacent dwelling units and onto neighboring uses. The pavilion shall remain a structure for private use and enjoyment by the private property owners. That means that it's not open to the public to come in and view, of potentially affecting the single family neighborhood. The property owner shall maintain, preserve, and protect all the existing landscaping on the site as previously mentioned. And then the property owner shall install and plant a minimum of 2 columnar trees or vertical trees along the front of the existing 6-foot high stucco wall on the west elevation. And then for the historic consideration, staff does want to have a couple points of clarification. Our chapter 30, which is our historic code in the Santa Ana Municipal Code, does define exterior modification as any change, alteration, restoration, remodeling, rehabilitation, construction, or relocation of the physical exterior of a historic structure. Furthermore, the Santa Ana Municipal Code says that no exterior modifications other than those identified by the Historic Resources Commission for administrative approval by staff shall be permitted with respect to the historic structure until the Historic Resources Commission approves a request through a public hearing process. Because the property is not being affected, the structure is not physically altering or changing the exterior of the Maharaja House, there's no additional review by the Historic Resources Commission required for the project at this time. Just the land use consideration of a structure exceeding 15 feet in height, which is required to be reviewed by the Planning Commission body. Pursuant to CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, the project is exempt from further review pursuant to class 3, for construction of new construction or conversion of small structures. Furthermore, there's no physical impacts associated with this project. Therefore, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission adopt the resolution approving CUP number 2022-06 as conditioned. I am available for questions. I do want to note too that the property owner is in attendance and the property owner's architect is in attendance should the Planning Commission wish to direct questions to them. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll bring it back to the commission, see if they have any questions for staff. Commissioner Aldretti, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I do, but I'll hold off until I hear other commissioners' comments.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Calderon, would you like to ask any questions?
Just a couple of questions. So I'm reading a couple of, actually, I'll save that question for later. Have there been any reports against like prior to this construction being built, like have there been any like reports towards like noise complaints or like anything like that? Police reports or anything like that?
If I could maybe clarify, Commissioner, are you maybe referring to any code enforcement issues or any just
Yes.
activity on the site?
Yeah, just any reports like that.
As far as I know, there hasn't been anything to noise concerns. There is a history on the property of alterations to the historic structure that have been addressed, as far as my understanding, throughout the years. That's as far as I know.
Okay. That's the only question I have for right now. I'll come back for a couple things. Thanks.
Commissioner McLaughlin.
I'll go off to later
Right.
when I have some questions. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Wu, do you have a question? Any questions?
Yes. Is this property owner occupied?
Thank you, Commissioner. Might have to defer that question to the property owner who's in attendance today. I don't know if that's the case.
Where is India?
Commissioner, could you repeat that question?
Where is the country nation of India located? What
It's in the continent of Asia.
Asia? Okay.
Okay.
So there are other nations in Asia, right?
Correct.
So sometime when we look at building, we can look at Asian influences, right? But the architect itself was influenced by Western standards too, right? So it's not pure Indian. Right? One might even say the box-like structure is not Art Deco, right?
You have a question for staff?
Yeah. And it's partly in question to some of the remarks made by the letters too. Because I'm having trouble putting together what people are saying with the reality of stuff. So I'm just trying to understand the two. Now, as I understand what you have done is that you looked from a planning perspective and you did your due diligence of what was allowed in considering a conditional use permit, right? And this particular alteration is in the backyard.
Commissioner, was that a question directed at
Yes.
staff? Yes. The pavilion is proposed in the rear yard, the backyard of the
So from
property.
the front of the house, there's a wall there, right? And there's some overgrowth of some trees and shrub and things. Okay. So the structure would not be in front of that. It would be on the other side of that, right? So the foliage would block some of it.
That's correct. There's existing landscaping on the property that would contribute to screening. Staff did feel that there was a need for additional landscaping though, which is
Right.
why we conditioned the property to include 2 new landscaping trees.
Was the terminology pavilion used by staff? Okay.
Yes.
Why don't you just call it a patio?
An accessory structure, I think that's how it's defined in the municipal code. Any sort of accessory structure, which could be a range of whatever you want to call it, you know,
Because it has
Pergola,
a coloring and legs, right?
a structure, yeah.
But they have a little architectural motif that goes above it, right? So by calling a pavilion, are we calling attention to the unique ethnic characteristic of it?
That wasn't the intention. I think it was more for, you know, loss of any other defining word for this structure.
Which I can understand because I would be searching for a word too. And I'm not saying that to put you down. I'm just asking the question in terms of clarification of what we are considering. Okay, so the other consideration was the lighting. The lighting you looked at so that it's not too obstructive. But then a lot of backyards in Santa Ana, people have strung up their own lights, right? And sometimes people call those Christmas lights, sometimes call them outdoor lights, right? But there's one and the same thing under your classification.
Commissioner, was that another question directed
Yeah,
at staff?
yeah.
I mean, there's a range of lighting for residential. This specific one would include in the structure itself and some up lighting which has a possibility of impacting adjacent residences, which is why we're requiring them to be shut off by 10 p.m. And as part of the permitting process through the city, if this does get approved, they'd be required to submit a photometric lighting plan to ensure that the foot candles don't exceed a certain foot candle, along the property lines. So we do want to ensure that there's no light pollution, if you will, spilling into over adjacent properties.
So the intent, and we haven't determined whether this is homeowner occupied, is to have a backyard that they can enjoy. And this patio area is one of those improvements they're doing to the backyard. And they're trying to keep it Asian theme.
I think that might be a question better directed
Yeah.
at the property owner.
Yeah, I'm
about the
putting
intent.
question mark at the end. Yeah. So I'll reserve that for the property owner. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Ramos. Do you have any questions?
Yes, I have a few questions. So we received several public comments, many citing a history of alterations to this home. I believe Commissioner Calderon slightly touched on them, and I just want to make sure that staff is confirming that whether or not there have been issues in the past with this specific property and the property owners making changes that might not have been approved by the city that required approval.
Yes, Commissioner, that can be confirmed by staff that there is a history of unpermitted alterations to the historic structure.
Thank you. And given that history, when considering this item and considering the resolution that would allow for this to happen, did city staff consider adding any additional conditions that would oversee the changes that they're seeking approval for? Or given, and I'm also asking this to understand how the city handles requests from property owners that have maybe in the past not sought proper approvals. So I'm wondering if because I'm looking at this resolution and I'm not seeing any conditions that may be specific to that. So I'm wondering if those were considered at all.
Thank you, Commissioner. If I could ask just a clarifying question. Are you asking if staff considered placing a condition to address the property itself and any sort of unpermitted changes, like the building itself, the Maharaja House?
I think just the building itself, but also the pavilion that is being proposed. I'm wondering if staff considered any conditions that would ensure that it was built in the way that the request is being made, and that that it wasn't built in a way that was substantially different or different at all, given that it's very specific in what would be approved.
One more clarifying question. We do have a condition of approval that limits the construction of this pavilion as it's currently designed, including the square footage that's proposed, the height that's proposed, the location. So that would ensure that it is built the way it's proposed and the way the Planning Commission is viewing it tonight. So maybe that answers your question. There wouldn't be any changes to the design, location, height of the structure being proposed tonight unless without prior approval from either staff or the Planning Commission.
Okay.
Does that answer maybe your question?
Yes and no. So I'm trying to understand the process.
Okay.
Does staff go on site during that construction to ensure that things are being built as they've said they would be?
Okay. Yes. So thank you for that. I think I understand your question better now. This is only one step in the overall approval process for this structure. It is a structure, so it needs to be reviewed for safety by both planning staff and the building agency. So there are plans that need to be provided, including structural plans and plans showing how these are going to be constructed. At each step of the construction phase, the property owner is required to call in for inspections by the building department. Our inspectors would ensure that the structure is designed and constructed per the plans that the commission is approving tonight and the plans that ultimately get approved by city staff for construction. So yes, there is some sort of oversight during the construction of this project.
Okay, thank you. And those are all the questions I have now.
Vice Chair Pham, do you have any questions?
A few questions. Given that this home is considered a historic landmark and the historic kind of landmark nature of it kind of guides us how to determine alterations to the actual home itself. But are there guidelines on the context of which the home sits in, i.e. the landscaping, the surrounding, because what the homeowner is seeking is to affect, from my understanding, affecting the surrounding, but not the actual historical structure itself. So are there any guidelines to kind of consider what's appropriate and what's not appropriate?
Thank you, Commissioner. Generally, yes. There are guidelines to alterations to the physical structure, historic structural cultural resource, and to what's called like a setting as well. Unfortunately, our Chapter 30 code, which regulates the historic properties, does not address that. So staff is in a position where we have to balance and uphold the land use proposal and ensure that the structure itself is not being modified while taking into account the overall setting, the appropriateness of the structure. So that's kind of in the position that we're at now. Because the code is silent on that, we default to the Land Use Planning Commission requirement of a conditional use permit, and that's all we can default to in our findings, unfortunately.
And do we have precedents within the city of architectural styles that are within R1, R2, low density zone that is Asian in nature? Do we have presence around the city that we can refer to, or would this be the first of its kind of an architecturally Asian structure?
I might have missed part of the question, but if I can clarify, are you saying if there's any sort of precedent for the style of the pavilion being proposed in this
Right,
neighborhood?
for
or
the
city?
situation of a single family R1, R2, or low density residential land use that has an architectural style that is Asian in nature.
I'm not aware of any immediate examples besides this one. The property, as mentioned, currently has an existing garden house that went through a similar process as what's being proposed. The garden house was constructed in Vietnam. It was over 150 years, I believe, and it was deconstructed, shipped to Santa Ana, and reconstructed on the site. So that's currently on the property now. I'm not aware of any other situations.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a couple questions. My understanding is this house, the historic house is on the Mills Act. Is that, can you confirm that?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And did that garden house go through a similar process in terms of CUP at the time? Was that in place, or what type of approval process did that go through?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. It did not. It was an administrative process because the structure doesn't exceed 15 feet in height. So it was below the height that would have triggered a conditional use permit. So it was just reviewed administratively.
Have we confirmed the height on that? And looking at it from the street, it really looks.
We have building permits for it and we have
Higher
plans.
than that.
So it was
Okay.
built per plans. So
All right.
yes.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Eldreddy, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I read through the staff report and I understand the reasoning of Chapter 30 of the Municipal Code and Section 36A that deals with the structure. And I heard your explanation to the Vice Chair. And I heard you mention that there were guidelines that may also guide the setting, the appropriate setting. So I'm wondering, where is that codified, if at all, or is it, that's my question, where is it codified?
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner. It's not codified in our current code. It is as part of the National Park Service, I believe, standards and guidelines for treatments of historic properties. So it's kind of this overguiding recommendation of how certain structures or additions should be overdone over historic structures.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Does the chairman asked about the Mills Act and whether this property was received the benefit of the Mills Act. Does the Mills Act impact at all the structure or anything beyond the structure? Meaning, sort of like the guidelines that you just mentioned, you get the benefit of the Mills Act. I think that means that you have an easement on the exterior of your property, but does that at all extend to anywhere beyond the physical? I shouldn't say property, I should say structure. Does it extend anywhere beyond the structure?
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, the Mills Act does address not only the physical structure, the historic structure, but the property as well. There's mentions in the Mills Act, at least this specific one, about view sheds and maintaining the ability of the public to view the property. But this is kind of where it falls back on the explanation of staff wanting to balance the land use right of someone to propose a structure versus upholding the historic quality and nature of the property. So we definitely did not want to be in a position where we're denying someone's right to propose a structure and go through this public hearing process as we currently are. So that's kind of the balance that we're trying to strike.
Got it. Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner McLaughlin, you had additional questions.
Okay, couple of questions. I got probably more later, but when you look at the site map, and I'm kind of building on what Eric just said, is that, you know, we've got a pool house, a garden house, and then the proposed pavilion. But if you go and look at the property itself, there's actually two pavilions that are sitting on the south end of the house. What are they? Are they the same thing? Are they still considered auxiliary structures?
Commissioner, is that a question directed at me?
That was a question.
Okay.
Are
So
this- I mean, first of all, do you agree there are 1 to 2 pavilions sitting between the wall, the 6-foot wall on Heliotrope and the garden house?
beyond what's been presented on the plans and beyond what I can see on Heliotrope, I'm unaware of any other structures on the site, but that could be the
So
case.
you didn't see it?
I didn't go into the backyard of the property, no.
Okay, so it's there.
Okay,
Okay, so I have a problem that, you know, we have a missing element. And then that brings another question. It says, as you go through this, how many auxiliary structures do you put on a property before it does have the impact on the historic nature of the product, of the property, as well as just how many auxiliary units do you have? Because at some point in time, it does become a little cluttered. And I think that's something we have to consider too. So that's one thing. Another thing with the site map, excuse me, I'm fighting off a cold, is that when you mention the height of the pool house, is that the flat roof? Or is that the slanted roof that's on there now? Because then we go back to the other discussion that says it's hard to believe that it's 15 feet or less.
thank you,
Garden house,
Commissioner.
correct?
In your,
Garden house, is that what you're?
No,
Pool
I'm
house.
talking specifically about the pool house.
and just so I can
Cool.
clarify, we're talking about this along Santa Clara Avenue on the screen here, on circling.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's an approximation, and because it was constructed in 1955, staff doesn't have any plans.
Except for one thing. There's a slanted roof on there that was not constructed in 1955. It could not have been constructed in 1955. In fact, it's impossible with the nature of that roof as it is today. So, height is the issue in some respects here. And so if we don't have valid numbers to start with, how do we make a good decision? And I don't think we have valid numbers to start with. I mean, your site map says that they're really not, they're just there for comparison or some kind of, I forget the exact words, but they're there not to give the exact measurements. They're there to aid in the measurements and the perception of 15 feet or less, 15 feet or more. So those are my two questions to staff. And then, I'll give you third questions from staff perspective. How do you determine it doesn't impact the neighborhood? Who in the staff is saying, this is okay? This isn't going to impact the neighborhood. And yet one of the conditions of the resolution is that it doesn't impact the neighborhood. I don't think that's a good statement. But if it is, then what we need to do is determine who is making that decision.
If I can answer that question. So when we look at an impact
of a structure, we have to look at whether or not that structure, in terms of its physical characteristics such as height, massing, material that are being used, is something that's outside of the character of what's already existing there in terms of both height, material, and the, what's there. Now, if you're referring to the architectural design of the element, architectural design is obviously a subjective request that we also evaluate. In this case, as the staff have indicated, the architectural design does have some reflection of what's already on the site that was previously approved, I believe, for the garden tea house. So that's where the evaluation of the structure itself is consider whether or not it creates an impact. If you look at the basis of what we're looking at is the height issue. So whether or not the height is present in the neighborhood, it is present. It is an accessory structure. So that's how we evaluate whether or not this could create an impact or not. I think staff provide a perspective of analysis, but it is the planning commission that ultimately can have that input as well. And our perspective is one perspective.
I didn't catch that last statement. Please repeat. I didn't catch your very last statement.
I said our perspective and what we put forth is one perspective. The commission also has the ability to review what's there and what staffs recommend and make its own determination.
Gotcha. I understand. Okay.
I guess I'd like to ask another question. Did a historic resources consultant review this project?
They did not.
Okay, thank you.
Point of clarification. Can I ask Commissioner McLaughlin
Follow
a
up with a
question?
question.
You can answer a question of mine?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
You made the observation of the backyard of other gazebo, patio structure. And I'm just curious, as you drive down Santa Clara, I'm trying to visual the heights from memory. On the other side of the driveway and that wall, there seems to be a white gazebo thing. Is that what you're talking about? The other pavilion-like structures?
There's a pavilion-like structure it's on the Santa Clara side, and it's on the Greenleaf side. Which is called in here the pool house.
Oh, that's called pool house.
Pool house.
Okay. And that's what you were talking about, right?
Right.
Okay.
And the best viewpoint that you can see that I saw was coming off of being on Heliotrope and being about mid-property. And you look over that. Because the pool, if I'm not mistaken, the pool was removed back in the early 2000s. So there's no pool there anymore. But there's a unit that says it's a pool house.
The structure is still there, correct?
So is that an auxiliary structure or is that an ADU?
Good question, Commissioner. We have no information that would state that this is an ADU. I, again, have not been on the rear yard of the property.
If it was, it was built in 1955, so there has to be documentation that says that there was plumbing or something in there that would make it an ADU, or is it just another, I'll just say, is it just another auxiliary structure?
If I may, sir, the plans submitted by the applicant indicates it's a pool house. So that's what we review based upon. Now, if they're using the structure other than that, certainly in violation of the code, we can address through that issue. But what they have submitted to us on a signed document that's been attested to as to the validity of the information on there, it's a pool house.
Okay, but then I'm going to go back to what Azuri was talking about earlier, and that is, does anybody once you've been given the drawings and everything else from the applicant, do we go out and look at what the drawings say versus what the physical property is in at this point in time? And I'm just going to say the fact that there's two structures that are on that property that aren't on the site map leading me to believe that no one went and checked everything out in its entirety.
Thank you, Commissioner. As just a matter of point, staff does not speculate on kind of what conversion could have happened on properties, right? So as Director Tai mentioned, we do take what's provided on the plans by a licensed architect as what's on there. In terms of the construction of structures that need building permits, we do. We do inspect when the footings get poured, when the structure gets erected and finalized. You may be aware, but there's also structures under 120 square feet in size that can be built that don't need building permits. That may include statues, other pavilions that are smaller in height that are not 120 square feet that do not need a building permit. So that could be possibly what it is that you're referring to. There'd be no way for us to go in and document every single statue and every single structure that's under 120 because it doesn't need a building permit. So they wouldn't come through the city to get a permit for that. However, during this process, if there's anything our inspectors see that may be against code, that might be an opportunity for us to address it at that time. But we don't speculate as to kind of what could or could not be as part of that pool house, unfortunately.
But the pool house is definitely larger than 125 square feet.
Right, which it did get a permit in 1955. But you're referring to other structures on the property, which I'm unaware of, unfortunately.
Between 1955 and 2010 or so, a lot can happen. So, I mean, I'm just saying relying back on a document from that time period to just going in and looking at the building and seeing that everything is in order. That's what
we don't do that, unfortunately, that would mean that we'd have to go to every single family residence to inspect structures that
No, I think that the essence of what's being talked about is the protecting what is considered to be a historic landmark in Santa Ana, and one of very few, if not the only one in the United States that exists in the manner in which this exists. And so it's just sometimes you have to take extra precautions and extra actions to ensure that things are done. That's all. I mean, it's no different. It's no different than any other checkout. I mean, if you have consistently good work, you don't necessarily check everything that people have done. But if you don't have consistently good work and you have some problems that have been in the past, my apologies, then to me, we need to be a little more cautious.
If I may, Commissioner, I'm not quite understanding the connection that you're trying to make between the pool house and the structure that's being proposed and the historic building. Could you clarify? So we have a building permit, 1955.
Yep.
And you mentioned that since 1955 to now, there's been a long time. But what about that do you mean in relation to the pavilion, though? Just so I can understand and maybe answer your question better.
The significance at this moment with regards to the pool house is two things. I'm just asking, is it more or less an ADU? Therefore, it has plumbing and everything else, and then it gets considered as an ADU, not as an auxiliary structure. Okay. And we should consider that situation. And the second thing is that if the roof line is slanted at this point in time, and it wasn't when it was built, there's added height to that building. Does it exceed 15 feet? And I haven't heard anybody say, oh yeah, we checked that out. It was a slanted roof and it's definitely under 15 feet. That's the simplicity of what I'm trying to get to.
Okay.
Validation.
Thank you. That makes more sense.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner.
So the governor's new thing on additional dwelling units, since you're talking about that pool house, is it affected by that, or because it was done in 1958, it's not covered by that? Or how did that work?
Commissioner, just to clarify, staff is unaware of any ADUs on this property.
Okay.
Commissioner McLaughlin mentioned that there's a possibility. I guess that could be a possibility. Again, we don't speculate. But in regards to your question, an existing structure which was legally permitted could be converted into an accessory dwelling unit if they went through the proper process. As far as we know, that hasn't happened on this property.
And that process would be administrative review by staff.
Correct.
And it bypasses all the Mills Act and all these other acts, right?
That's correct. The state law supersedes any sort of discretionary approvals that we can provide, so it has to be administrative.
Yeah, and I'm not advocating for that, mind you, but I'm just trying to understand the nature of what the governor is doing and how it might impact our decision today.
Commissioner, I don't know that any of the state ADUs are in effect today. The decision is based on a structure that's exceeding 15 feet in height. That's all the decision is. And there's findings that the commission has to make, that staff has made as part of the resolution. The commission can decide to agree with those findings and approve the project. They can decide to deny the project, or they can decide to approve it with further conditions if that's what the commission's prerogative is.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I have another question, actually. You had mentioned there was some work that was done to the house itself. There were some compliance issues with some of the work done to the house. Was that, what items was that regarding?
I believe it was in regards to the steel windows on the property.
There's more than just the windows.
That's as far as I know. There could be more.
Okay, are there any other
Just have
questions?
a
Yes.
totally random question. When houses or properties become historic, do we take pictures of the status that they're in, just in case like moments like this, we can bring it up?
Yes, there's usually a part of the process that involves taking photo documentations.
Okay.
In 2004, I was not with the city, so I don't know if that happened, but there is a write-up that gets written up as part of the process.
Okay.
And that's included as part of the commission's report. It does include one photo, but as part of the current process now, we do go on and take photos as the baseline for exactly these sort of situations.
Gotcha.
And for properties on Mills Act, so we can know what changes have been done.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Madam Secretary, have we received any written communication?
We have received 23 written comments, and the comments have been distributed to the commission and they've been posted on the website.
Okay, thank you. I will now open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to speak on this matter?
Good evening. My name is Quentin Stanton. I'm the architect. Thank you for your time for considering this project. I believe the staff did a great job summarizing the project and what we're proposing. I believe that it'll be a great enhancement to the historic nature of this property. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I believe the owner, Chan Q, he can also answer questions in depth as well. I know one of the questions from Commissioner Wu was if this is an owner-occupied property, and I can answer that it is owner-occupied.
Okay, thank you. Do any commissioners have questions for the applicant?
With tall kids too, right?
Sorry?
Sure will.
With tall kids, because I see them playing basketball outside.
Oh, yeah. I think there's a basketball hoop in the driveway. Yeah.
Commissioner Ramos, do you have any questions?
None at this time. Thank you.
Commissioner Aldretti?
Not this time.
Commissioner Calderon?
All right. You mentioned that the house is unoccupied, correct?
No, sorry, owner-occupied.
Got it. Okay. Totally just random question here. Is this house or has this house ever been on Airbnb for rentals or anything like that? For special events of that nature?
That would probably be a better owner question. Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't believe so.
Okay.
No. They've lived there for a long time, full time. Yeah.
Commissioner McLaughlin?
At the moment.
Okay. And Vice Chair Pham, do you have any questions for the applicant?
Just for clarification, did you survey the site?
I did not commission a full survey. I used previous documentation for the site. And then also I visited the site myself in putting together that site plan.
So everything that's on the site plan is everything that you saw on site?
There's a decent amount of site elements such as landscaping or some smaller decorative items that Commissioner McLaughlin spoke about. There's again, I can't speak to exact dimensions or heights, but there's a small, how should I put it? Like a gong, if you will, a traditional Vietnamese element on site. But the major elements are there, just not, specific landscaping or decorative structure or, statues, things of that sort.
Thank you.
I don't, Commissioner Wu.
To the nature of the owner is family oriented, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Well, the original architect, the owner was of Indian descent, right?
I do remember reading that in when I was looking at historic documentation.
So inherent in the history of the property, there's an Eastern belief, value system in terms of family.
I'm sorry, one more time. I am having trouble hearing through your mask.
Oh, I'm just trying to understand the historical use of it had Eastern influence and Asian cultural values such as family.
Hard to say, but I do know that it was I think the original.
So
owner was
sometime
Indian.
when you're having family events, could it be misunderstood as you're having a party house?
Hard to say. I think a party house is, I do believe the client has a large family and enjoys having family members over.
And the two of them are prominent citizens of the community, aren't they? That sometimes they have fundraising event, which is no different from other occupants in the neighborhood too, right?
Yes, I think this is the owner could definitely speak to this better, but yes, they are prominent members of the community, from my understanding. Yes.
And
Point of clarification, Chair, is this the time to ask questions for the applicant's representative or for the applicant?
Yeah, if the applicant is better to speak to this, I'd probably like to, it'd be best if we heard from him.
Sure.
Answer definitively.
And maybe I can stay up here while he.
Sure.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, I just thought I would offer a friendly reminder at this point in the proceedings. The agenda item before you tonight is framed as a conditional use permit, which, like all CUPs, must be supported by findings that are outlined in the Santa Ana Municipal Code, section 41638. Typically, it's most helpful for discussion that those questions to the applicant or to staff be pertinent to the findings that need to be made or not be made in the event that the commission chooses to deny the CUP. But in any event, I just wanted to offer a friendly reminder that the questions ordinarily should remain pertinent to the findings that need to be made in support of the CUP.
Thank you. Oops, I agree.
Maybe they can. Yeah. If you don't mind, if there's questions for the owner.
Yeah, I don't know if that question is pertinent to the height of the building.
well, I thought it was, since in light of the letters that we got, and I was trying to put in perspective the validity of some of the statement. You can make any statement you want, but when it doesn't follow through with the determination of the CPUC, didn't have anything to do with it. You complain about their trash, for instance, just a hypothetical, but it has nothing to do with a conditional use permit, right? So I'm just trying to, again, put on the focus of having the homeowner speak to what he's trying to do, because I'm trying to understand it. Could you have a theme there going on with the gates of heaven and all that? And I guess, but also bringing a part of your homeland that you left, you're also honoring a space for that in your backyard, right? I'm just trying to find a connection to what you're trying to achieve with the CPUC and the changes.
I didn't understand
And
the
if this
question.
is inappropriate, forget it. Just let's strike the question and go on to someone else.
I think he just wants.
Commissioner Ramos?
Yes, I have a question related to some of the public comments that were received, and I just wanted to hear from the owner. So I know there were several public comments received by residents of Floral Park citing maybe a history of issues with unpermitted alterations. And I just wanted to see if the property owner had anything to say regarding those comments and how this project would be different if approved tonight.
Asking about the Bishop's name to your house.
My name is Chan Kyo. I'm the owner of the house. I've been living in this house for 34 years. There was some time, to answer the question, there was some time then we try to resurface the house, I mean the wall. And I also tried to change the window, the 2-0 window. Then finally we get the permit from the city to change the window because the older window is not good enough, it's too old, and there's some air leaking in and become very cold. But finally we have the agreement with the city and we do whatever the city asks for. That about the question before. Now I would like to say that I am a physician and working in a hospital in Fountain Valley for 43 years. When I graduated from high school in Vietnam, I have a special award for the history. And from that day, after high school, I always try, beside the medical school, I always try to study about Vietnamese history. Now I'm a contributor to the research and development of the Vietnamese about the ancient history. And also I'm also a contributor to the historical journal and archaeological journal of the Vietnamese government. And I collect antique from Vietnam. So that's why when I have an occasion, I brought an antique house from Vietnam, about 160 years. I brought over here in the vacant lot. I would like to remind that we have to, my house is situated in 2 different lots. The one lot belongs to the Maharaj house before, and another lot is vacant lot. So I put the 335 square foot house, antique house, completely intact. We don't have to modify anything, just put in disassemble, put back together. And just recently, about 10 years ago, I found another structure, very old structure, more than 100 years old. And it's a 2-story, they call Moon Pavilion. So that's why we have the height. And the structure is about 70% in good condition. So I have to refurbish the other 30%. And it is very, very well for the most talented artists from Vietnam in the ancient time to do all the carving. We can, luckily, we can preserve all the good wood carving. So we would like to contribute to the intellectual and on the, I'm sorry, intellectual and the, on the, and the culture of the ancient Vietnamese. I would like to contribute that. And on the lot, on the vacant lot, only the house, the ancient house, and this moon pavilion. It is very elegant when it will contribute to the culture of Santa Ana. When I bought the house, I keep the house intact, almost intact, just because some weather leaking into the house. But I do a stone and we call Jen garden. Also, I put the area for the neighborhood to do the Tai Chi and put a band on. So the almost like a public garden. And I see all the children, the people come in and enjoy the garden. And also the children come and play. I have a bench over there. So also I taught Tai Chi for the neighborhood just because of COVID. So we stopped that. So I would like that. So definitely you don't have to worry about the side of the other side. We have a pool house, which is about 700 square foot. We never intend to use it, but I display a lot of my antique collection. I put my antique over there, and also I use it as storage. I have more than 1,000 artifacts. Sometimes more than some small museum in Vietnam. I think I have the artifact from the ancient time, Bronze Age about. So almost more, I have more than collection on the National Museum. So I would like to display in that museum, but that's for my family and my friends only, not for public. So I thought that my moon pavilion is tall because elegant. It's beautiful, tall and elegant. So because you say we call moon pavilion, we want to reach high to the sky, to the moon. So usually every year we have a.
Excuse me, sorry. I'd like to just give the mic now to other commissioners in case any of them have direct questions that they would like to ask you while you're there.
Okay.
Thank
yeah, I'm ready for a question.
Okay, I don't think we had any other questions. Commissioner Vice Chair Pham, did you have any questions?
I think this is more for Pedro. During the owner's talk, he mentioned that the lot was, there's two lots that's merged. Is that correct? Can you confirm that's the case?
The tax maps show two legal lots tied.
Right.
So yes.
And my assumption is one lot was the original historic lot for the house. And can you confirm that one lot has nothing to do with the house, but was merged with the historic lot?
I can't because if they're tied together, they act as one property. So when it was reviewed to be listed on the historic register, it was reviewed the building and then the setting.
Okay. Just want to confirm.
Thank you.
Never.
We will at this time if you have any final remarks, feel free to make any final remarks.
Well, I heard about that. The question about the pool house to be used as a second unit for renting, but we never intend that. And I can guarantee one thing: we have two lots. One lot we use it for the culture, the ancient antique and the moon pavilion. And the other house, there are only two people live in the house: my husband, my wife, and myself. And I have one children. We never intend to use anything, nothing. I can guarantee you. Even on the vacant lot with the pool, with the antique house and the pavilion, there could be nothing else. And in my residence of the Maharaja, we will not have anything else. We never intend that. I can guarantee, I can sign paper. Even for the other side, we will not plan anything. I can guarantee that, nothing else.
Thank you. We'll hear from the public and you'll have an opportunity to respond. So now we'll take comments from the public. Secretary, do you have any members of the public that would like to comment?
If you are attending this meeting in person and would like to comment on this item, please fill out a request to speak form and turn it into the secretary. If you are participating via Zoom and would like to comment on this item, please select the hand icon and unmute yourself. If you are calling in and would like to comment on this item, please dial *9 and press *6 to unmute yourself. I will wait a few seconds.
Hello, Julie, you may unmute yourself. And you have 3 minutes to speak.
For hearing me. I appreciate the comments of the commissioners. I oppose the granting of this conditional use permit request for the reasons set forth in my original written comments, which I'll highlight. The owners have purchased a landmark historic property, which is steeped in history and architectural significance. Furthermore, this property has a Mills Act contract from which the owners have been annually benefiting by significantly lower property taxes. This historic property includes not just the land, but all associated structures and improvements. As such, the owners are contractually prohibited from destruction of the character defining features of the building or site. They're also prohibited from making alterations unless approved by the Historic Resources Commission. Such alterations include a structure, and I'm just quoting the language of the Mills Act contract, which is unsightly by reason of its height, condition, or inappropriate location. The notion that the purview of the Historic Resources Commission is limited only to alterations that physically touch the historic residential structure is dangerously narrow-minded and contrary to the express terms of the Mills Act. The character-defining features include the building site and the additions of any structure that would interfere with the character-defining features of that site. If you look at page 636 of your packet, when this property was granted historic register status, the city's own documents were incorporated, and it said that the exterior features of the Maharaja House are considered character-defining features and should be preserved. These features include massing and composition, terraces, walled gardens, and original landscaping. While the staff report suggests that the structure would add to the cultural interest of the property, it would be as much out of place as a lookout tower modeled after a Wild West fort. Bit by bit over the years, these owners have chipped away at the original character-defining features of this unique landmark property, including the original landscaping. As such, these are a deliberate character-defining design element, which was simple and expansive and devoid of any prominent art pieces that would detract from the simplicity and the sleekness of the original Art Moderne design. The fact that the owners have an existing tea house in the rear of the property is not controlling, since the bulk of that structure is hidden from the view corridor due to its positioning near the property line. The issue is not whether this new structure is compatible with other non-historic features of the property. By proposing to add yet another immense, visually striking, but wholly incompatible structure, which towers over the front wall garden, the owners are again failing in their duty.
Your time is up.
No landscaping. I urge you to deny this CUP request.
Thank you.
Hello, The caller whose phone number ends in digit 604, you may unmute yourself and you have 3 minutes to speak.
I don't myself. Star six. Hello, my name is Ann Etheridge. I live at 2128 North Greenleaf. I oppose the approval of this permit as well. And what I will say, since many of my remarks were just made by the previous speaker, I find it astonishing that the staff did not go into the backyard, that they suggest that the proposed almost 23-foot high pagoda in the backyard will not change the neighborhood and that it does not distract from the historic nature of the property. I cannot tell you how vehemently I disagree with those comments by the staff. I might suggest as an alternative, and I don't know if it's appropriate for me to suggest that, but that this decision be postponed until the staff can do a proper examination of the property, because based on what I've heard, that has not taken place. And I'll also just throw in, as a matter of interest, the Art Moderne or streamlined style came out of the Art Deco movement in the 1930s. That movement started in France. The house was built in 1938 by the Maharaja of Indore. He built it for his daughter. He went to school in Santa Ana, and it is the only castle in the Western United States to be built by a foreign ruler. This residence and the surrounding property has incredible historic importance, not only to Floral Park, and not only to Santa Ana, and not only to the state of California. Please help to preserve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Etheridge. Do we have another caller?
Ellen, you may unmute yourself and you have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you very much. This is Ellen Coldway, and I'm a neighbor on North Heliotrope Drive, just a few houses down. And based on the information that I've heard tonight, I just don't think the Planning Commission has sufficient information to make valid findings of fact to show that this pavilion is in compliance with the standards of the municipal code when it comes to the impact on the surrounding community. I really appreciate the doctors letting us know that they are still residents personally residing in the house. My concern remains that this structure and the building will be used and continued to be used by many people in the community and beyond the bounds of the community. And I think that's wonderful. And it's also not my business, except when it may result in problems with parking, problems with security, problems with traffic congestion. And I just don't think that the planning department has addressed the issue of why do we have another outsized structure unless it's going to be used for large gatherings. And I think that that's fairly clear. And so I'm coming from a slightly different perspective as a neighbor just down the street who honors other families and their right to get together. But I'm just concerned about the overflow impact that has not been examined in the planning department by the effect of this additional structure, which will attract additional people in what seems to be becoming a wonderful community center, but may not be remaining a single residence family home. Thanks so much. I really do appreciate the information I've received at the Planning Commission meeting so far, especially from the architect and the applicant, but I just haven't received sufficient convincing information that it's not going to have a negative effect on this surrounding community to do anything other than oppose it at this point and ask you to please remand it. The other thing is, I'm blessed to have the Mills Act myself, and that really has not been my experience, that I can do whatever I want as long as it doesn't affect the main structure of my house. Anything that shows on the street has to be consistent and blessed by the authorities. That's my understanding, and I wouldn't change anything without getting it blessed by them. Thanks very much. This is Ellen Coldaway, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Please read my
Thank you, Ms.
letter.
Coldway.
Please read my letter, which has my comments in greater detail.
Thank you.
We have no other callers, Commissioner.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll turn it to the in-person speakers. I have 4
Hello,
individuals who'd
this
like to
is
speak.
Jessica. I did put my name in and it says my hand was raised. I'm on the phone.
You may go ahead and speak. I apologize. We didn't see it.
Oh, that's okay. Okay, thank you. First off, I want to say we mentioned that the structure is in a backyard, and
Can you
maybe
state your name, please?
it is decided or described, but in actuality, it's a side yard. You can view the whole thing from North Heliotrope Drive. Also, the style of the house being art moderne and art deco, it's not Asian. It does not complement with the Asian pavilion that is being suggested to be built there. And also, there are events held there. I live on the street, just a few houses down, and I see them in progress. I see the cars parked there, and I think it's wonderful. But this house, this proposed pavilion, while it's not complementary to the style of the house, it is too visible from the sidewalk in the street. The visual impact is just overwhelming. And I'm losing my train of thought. They have in the past, we talked about the windows were mentioned, but they also made changes to the roof after they were denied to make any changes. And the changes that they did make resulted in the city filing a misdemeanor charge against them, and the Historic Resource Commission talking with them and telling them they had to make certain changes, which they did. I have no problems with the beautiful buildings that they have added to the backyard, but I do have problems with the location and the size. I question the need for this 2-story pavilion because I am aware that the residents are not, this is not their primary residence. They live in West Floral Park. This is a part-time residence for them, which begs me to question, why do you need this? What's the purpose? What's the need if it's just for private family use, which I know it isn't. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you state your name, please?
Leslie Cotto.
Thank you. So we'll hear comments from the audience. Are those all the callers? Okay. First card I have here is from Mr. Jeffrey Katz.
Thank you very much. My name is Jeffrey Katz. I'm the president of the Floral Park Neighborhood Association. I'm actually here in my capacity as the president. This is unusual for me. We as a neighborhood association, we don't get involved in neighbor issues. We remain neutral. In this particular case, I was directed by our board to come here and present. And I want to make it clear on the substance, we remain neutral. However, on procedural matters, we do oppose for a couple of reasons, which I'll go into. I also live down the block from the Qs. They're wonderful neighbors. I'm reluctant to speak against them and their project, and he's certainly done wonderful things to the property and added additions. We are a city which has a paucity of destinations, and they have in certain ways contributed to creating destinations here in Santa Ana. I really applaud it and I appreciate it. What concerns me, and I want to echo some of the themes that were mentioned by the commissioners here already, and by Ms. Humphreys in her phone call, and that is the planning department's wrong conclusion that the HRC and their jurisdiction is limited to the structure itself. Ms. Humphreys in her phone call to you cited from documentation that was put into the historic register with the city itself, which identifies not simply the structure itself, but the gardens and the landscape as well as part of it. I will tell you, as a personal matter, I had submitted a permit to try to get a new fence to replace a deteriorating fence on my property. I'm lucky as well to have a property which is deemed historic. I submitted a permit to replace my split rail with another sort of a ranch style fence that would complement my ranch home. And I got a response back from Jill Robbie, who at the time was a senior planner in the planning department, where she rejected it because it detracted from the overall setting and architecture. So it isn't simply the architecture of the building, which is considered by the planning department, but the setting itself. The second part that I want to propose, argue to this commission is that the planning department unilaterally made that decision that the HRC is devoid of jurisdiction. I will tell you, this is my third time appearing here before the commission. The first two times I was here was one on a proposed construction of a 5-foot wall by Mr. Ness at Italian Renaissance in Floral Park. And the other thing was on the 2525 matter. I argued against the planning department. They were on the opposite side of the table. And when you have criteria as reflected in the paperwork here, where they're considering what it adversely impacts the community, and number two, whether it is a positive contribution to a neighborhood and character and identity.
Speaker, your time is up.
I am skeptical, with all due respect, that the planning department really is in a position to make that decision. Ultimately, they were overturned on Mr. Ness's construction of 5-foot wall, and they were overturned by 19,000 voters and residents that deemed what they had approved not to be in the best interest of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Katz. Next speaker is Tim Rush.
Good evening, commissioners and Chair Morrissey and staff. While I chair the Historic Resources Commission for this city, and I also serve as a board member for Preserve Orange County, a countywide preservation group, and have a long time been on the board of the San Ana Historical Preservation Society. I'm here this evening speaking as a private citizen. I would certainly echo all of the comments by Julie Humphreys. And based on many of the questions and comments by commissioners, it's obvious that Chapter 30 perhaps is not being interpreted properly. Or at the very least, there's some real serious gaps in the way it's been written. There's also comments tonight by the applicant. He keeps referring to the vacant lot. There is no vacant lot. That property was purchased, 2 lots, and built by Allison Honer in 1938 or 39. And I would submit to you that the pool was originally a very instrumental part of the landscaping, which, as Julie pointed out, is part of the overall provenance of the property. I don't think that should have been allowed to be removed. Now, I think what the applicant is proposing is culturally insensitive to the architecture, as if I went to Vietnam and wanted to propose an Art Deco modern structure on some historic site in Phnom Penh. I just don't think it makes a lot of sense. And staff's calling this property now eclectic is only because we've allowed all these other goofy structures that shouldn't be there in the first place, because they take away from the Art Deco modern streamlined architecture. It's disturbing to me. And the other part that is troubling is that these folks have a disturbing history of things that they have done to the property in no particular chronological order, but starting with the windows, which they were turned in for trying to change out in the middle of the night. without a permit, putting in the wrong windows. They also at one point proposed changing the roof from being a flat roof, which is an integral part of that architectural style, to a pitched roof. And then these miscellaneous structures and other things added both in the front yard and so forth, which are not in keeping with the architecture of how this home was originally designed. So I have no complaint. I think it's laudable that they're wanting to honor their homeland and their history by having a repository for these items, but this is the wrong place
Speaker, your time
for
is
these
up.
items to be placed, and this is the wrong structure, nearly the same height as a house. So to say that it has no effect upon the house or the adjoining properties, I think is a fallacy. Thank you.
Mr. Rush. Next speaker is Mr. Ed Mirashi.
Good evening, commissioners and city staff. My name is Ed Marashi and I live at 2139 North Flower Street. I'm a Floral Park resident. I'm vice chair of the Historical Resource Commission, but I'm not here speaking on that behalf. I'm also a member of the Floral Park Historic Register Committee, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. I oppose this project, and my parents were two strict school teachers, and I was raised in that kind of environment. They were strict, but they were fair. And so when I knew if I got into trouble, again, I knew there would be consequences, and I've lived that way, and I think I've turned out pretty well. As you've heard, this property, there are character-defining features of a property that go into the DPR that define the historic house itself. Casement windows and awnings are part of that DPR. What we did lose are casement windows and awnings, and they have yet to be returned. Now, the city made a deal with the homeowner, and we've worked our way past that. Now, again, last summer, the homeowner has taken the pool house that you've heard about that used to have a flat roof, and it's now no longer a flat roof. It's been increased. So they re-roofed and added to that roof line, putting it over 15 feet, again, without a variance and without a building permit. And my proof of that is the photographs, the satellite photographs I sent you in my letter, as well as the building permits that's also attached to that letter. So again, the strict part says you got to have some consequences here. And to me, the consequences would be denying the variance or modifying the variance. Now, the fairness comes in. The fairness would be let them put in that tall part with the roof, and so lower it so the 6 feet, the bottom half of that structure, remove that and lower it down to where it would be at the 15 foot. Now, it's far enough away from the modern style that I get that, and it's okay. You have that segment. You talked about the site. You want to maintain the close perimeter to the modern, which it is because it's a double wide property. So when you drop that down, you don't have this turret style or anything else. And Commissioner Wu, I want to address you. The Floral Park has its own historic register committee. And what we're trying to do is trying to get ourselves on the historic register. And we're almost there. It was brought back to us. We made some modifications. We're going to go back in. We have absolutely no plans whatsoever, like the city of Orange, to have a historical overwatch in the neighborhood telling you what you need to have in your backyard and everything else. We're not
Speaker,
doing that.
your time is up.
So again, we give leeway for people to have their own, bring in their own lifestyle and have that in the backyard. And by reducing that, you still allow them to do that. That's
Thank you,
the
Mr.
fairness.
Morosi.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker is Mr. Eamon Garles.
Hello, thank you for letting me speak tonight. My name is Eamon Garces. I live at 1901 North Heliotrope Drive. And I think it's very important that we make a distinction here. This house was built for somebody from Asia, but it is not built in an Asian style. This was built by a very prominent architect in Santa Ana in the 1930s in this Art Deco streamlined modern style. The characteristics of that style are straight lines, angles, and minimalism. Basically, what's been going on at that house over many years now is definitely not minimalism. You have a number of structures that do deter from the overall appearance of the house. You have an Asian themed plaque over the front door. You have a warrior statue in the front yard. You have a temple type building in the backyard, as well as other pagodas. This would be one additional structure. It comes to a point when you have all of these structures, which are very nice on their own, and I appreciate wanting to, honor your heritage, but the totality of all these structures really outweigh what's going on with the streamlined modern, to the point where you now have a property that's probably more predominantly Asian than streamlined modern. And I think when you have the Mills Act, there's an implicit contract between you and the city that you're going to keep up the house in the style it was built. So you are a temporary owner of the house. You're entrusted with keeping the house in its original style. I mean, that's the spirit of the Mills Act, as I understand. So I think we've strayed pretty far away from that at this point. And we probably need to stop any additional building, but for any future generations that own the house, there'll have to be a lot of modifications that go back to the original. I think the pool would have been an excellent example of Art Deco. It probably would have been a very minimalist pool, and it would have been very complimentary. So, at this point, I think, the neighbors are lovely people, but I think we've sort of strayed very far away from the original property. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garces. Would the applicant like to make any final remarks, address any of the comments?
I'd like to say thank you for everyone for expressing their thoughts on the project. I think that the pavilion is located a respectful distance away from the existing home. And I think that distance negates the impact of a different architectural style from the house. And the owner also wanted me to reiterate, understanding, of course, that it was purchased together as one property. He still wanted to emphasize that it is 2 lots, and this pavilion is located on the quote unquote vacant lot, obviously still on the same property, but it is on the same, how should I put it, paper lot that is on the same side as that garden room, which is the same style of the pavilion. So it is a cohesive architectural style in that respect. And I believe that is everything. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Stanton. Okay, so we will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. Does the commission have any final questions of staff this time? I'll start with Commissioner Wu. Or comments?
I wanted to talk rather than ask a question, but let's talk about the term Art Deco. Art Deco has different influences, right? And are you familiar with the the Chinese and Japanese influence in Art Deco. And the architects that was trained at University of Penn, Robert Fan and Poi Gum Lee from the Pratt Institute of New York. And that there's a whole Art Deco movement until the Imperial Japanese bombed some of it in Shanghai. So in the 1920s, with many of the affluent students from China, Japan, Vietnam, they were all going to Paris to study, right? And as you do when you're young, for wine, and then you start interacting with other people from Mexico and other countries, and you're sharing ideas that influences a style of jazz and Art Deco that was emerging at the time. So when we look at Art Deco, we look wider than just geometric lines and those things. There's cultural influence and language and other factors in it. So when you say that when we look at Art Deco, you can say one is a definitive way of it should be. There's a different style within it.
Commissioner, is that a direct question for
That's my
staff?
question.
I would politely disagree.
Okay.
There's a specific definition for art modern, streamlined modern, sometimes it's interchangeable. There's specific character defining features of an art modern that give it the name, right? A lot of it's been included in today's conversations, emphasize curved forms, long horizontal lines, rounded corners, flat roofs, horizontal bands of windows, white. Those are distinctive of an art modern. So I would politely disagree.
Yeah, and I also Google Art Deco in Asia and find that there's various style contribution to the Art Deco movement as well. And I don't know, or do we know whether that influenced the architect, since the original owner was from India?
I cannot answer that question. I am not familiar with the influences of Asian culture onto art modern.
So what we're going by as history is what we have made it to be and what we're recording it to be, right? Of the historic significance.
Again, I'm sorry, I'm unaware of any of the history of that sort of influence on this style.
Well, everyone's here mentioning history, and I'm just trying to, again, wrap my head against history. And in this city, history means things to different people. So when we say history, whose history? And I know that it has been eloquently explained by those members of the Historical Commission and other preservation effort, and I hear you, and I understand that. But I just want to say it in a different way that does not put down another culture and a family that is trying to make a family home there, and who has tried to express that so that everyone understands what he's trying to do, and that those influences are actually compatible with Art Deco. That's just my personal opinion, because I try to research that and see if it was not.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have Commissioner Ramos. Do you have any questions or comments you'd like to make?
I'll pass for now. Thank you.
Commissioner Aldretti.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions for staff, but I thought I'd offer some comments. So I wanted to thank the applicant and the neighbors for providing comments. It's comments like yours that help inform my thinking about how to view the CUP and the proposed structure. So here's how I view it. I think given the structure's prominence in the front yard, 6 feet from the side wall along heliotrope means that structure will be a focal point. That structure would be visible, I think, from Santa Clara and heliotrope. And I don't think that the trees that staff included can mitigate the impact, that visual impact. I also don't think that the structure is consistent with the streamlined, modern Art Deco architecture of the historic home. So this is all to say that I arrive at a different conclusion than staff did, because I think we ought to have consulted historic preservation guidelines in our review and applied a holistic approach to analyzing the site, not just the structure. And so my position is that I cannot in good conscience support the CUP. That's it.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Calderon?
I have no questions or comments at this time.
Commissioner McLaughlin, any comments, questions?
Hit many of the things that I would also say. I think that what this does, though, and I think we had a little bit of a theme, and I brought it up at the beginning, is say, you know, we need to figure out how we can have checks and balances in this process at the point of documentation being exchanged by the planning department. And we also need to understand, you know, how we know that there's certain things that have happened with this particular property. And so what we need to do is be able to checks and balance, have some checks and balance in there so that we can ensure that the decision that we're being asked to make has the right amount of data behind it, and the correct data, and as much data as we can possibly get in order to make a good decision. And I just don't believe, and I didn't believe early, that we did have that information. And you know, maybe it was a little random bouncing around and everything else, but focusing on what we're trying to focus on, this particular facility, I just don't feel we had sufficient answers, sufficient information. And I also think that this will be a beacon on the street. And, you know, it says that staff has recommended 2 colander trees. You need 15 in order to make this thing go away or be mitigated. And I think it's just something that we got to take into consideration. So I too will join Eric in the fact that I would vote to deny this at this point in time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Bring it back to Vice Chair. Pam, do you have any comments or questions?
Well, first, I'd like to thank the applicant for his explanation on why he wants the structure on his site. From my perspective, I struggle with the idea of what's private property and what's public domain, the distinction in which we're making it, who's and what's priority in the situation. And it's hard because, again, this is someone's private house. Everyone has their own predilections on what they want to decorate, how they want to decorate, and how they want to use their private property. However, what's clear to me is that the fact that the applicant has already accepted financial resources from the Mills Act. And to me, because the applicant has used the Mills Act to finance certain things on his property, that we need to use the Mills Act to define how we judge the addition or subtraction of that property. And so my thoughts is still it's private property, but the moment that you take taxpayer money to subsidize a property, then it becomes that you have to respect your neighbor's input and the community's input on what's on your property or what's near the public domain. That's my comment.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Ramos.
Yes, thank you. I too would like to thank the applicant. Thank you for being here today, for answering questions specifically that I asked, and also for explaining what you've been doing with your home and how you're bringing art and really unique pieces from Vietnam so that others can also enjoy them. And I have some similar sentiments to those expressed by several commissioners, even those with opposing views. And I'm wondering if, and I don't know that this can be done tonight, but if there is a way that the plans can be altered so that the applicant can have this pavilion I don't know if it can remain exactly the same, but in a way that reduces the impact, the visual impacts, or if there's additional things that staff can recommend to mitigate those impacts. Because I'm trying to find what the middle ground would be on this. But those are all my comments for now.
Thank you. I'd like to say also, I appreciate the applicant's comments and what he's trying to do with the property. I think what's happened so far with the tea house in the back, it's an amazing structure. So I think bringing that little slice of home back to your property, it's worked out well. But I think also I agree with the procedural aspect of this, and appreciate that as a commissioner here, my opinion, I went through this process with the Historic Resources Commission recently. We wanted to move a porch out 10 inches. And I thought, oh, that's a slam dunk, that's no problem. And it turned out I really don't know that much about historic properties. Yeah, I got slammed. So I think it's important that I was looking at the Secretary of Interior standards, and I wasn't aware of the Mills Act requirements. So that was another question, if you can confirm that, in fact, the Mills Act does require a separate review. But the Secretary of Interior standards says that new construction should be appropriately scaled and located far enough away from the historic building to maintain its character and that of the site and setting. So to me, it really says to me that although it's separate from the structure, the setting is part of the historic aspect of the property. So it really needs to be reviewed by the Historic Resource Commission as a matter of procedure, if we want to procedurally do it right. But so that, that's where I'm headed. But I also think that because it's under the Mills Act, that any, if we're going to approve a COP, it has to include restoring the property to its appropriate. I don't know what happened with the windows, but I think they need to be the proper historic windows. I don't know if the awnings were there originally when it was constructed, but I noticed on the 2000, the older photographs. So, from my perspective, if we're going to approve a COP on another project, that the historic property needs to be in full compliance.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, just a point of procedure, if you don't mind. Your decision on a CUP must be supported by findings. In the event of an approval, those findings are provided to you tonight in the context of staff's resolution before you. In the event of a denial, that would similarly need to be supported by a finding found by the Planning Commission on record, supported by the material and evidence that's been deduced at tonight's hearings. So I guess in either way, your decision tonight needs to be supported by findings. If it's a positive decision, those findings are supplied to you already by staff. If it's a negative decision, then you would need to make those findings from the dais in support of your decision.
Thank you. So the comments made regarding the Mills Act, can you confirm that those are accurate in terms of requiring I believe she said they would require a review by the Historic Resources Commission?
Thank you, Chair. That's not 100% true. There are some, obviously, talking points in the Mills Act agreements that talk about the exterior that certainly do have to go through the commission. Others that talk about the setting. The commission may be aware that there's administrative review authority to other structures or like-for-like changes. So it's not always a black and white situation when it comes to these structures.
But this is a CUP application. It's not an administrative. If the structure was under 15 feet, then that would be fully administrative review. But in this case, where it's not an administrative review.
Chair, you asked about the Mills Act agreement. Right. Are you now asking about the conditional use permit land use process? Those are two separate things.
My understanding from your explanation that if it was an administrative review, you mentioned there was an administrative review involved, then there is no HRC review.
If I could clarify your first question about the Mills Act, and some of the statements made by the public talked about what needs to go to the commission, Historic Resources Commission, for properties that have Mills Act. Depending on the work, they don't always have to go to a commission, the Historic Resource Commission. It depends on the intensity of the historic alterations to the outside. There are some administrative authorities that planning staff has, like for like change outs or accessory structures. If they're under 15 feet, you're correct. But that was your first question. If I could maybe clarify your second question, your follow-up question about the conditional use permit.
No, that's fine. I was reacting to your statement about administrative review.
Mr. Chair, maybe I could ask clarifying. So in your administrative review, did you take the Mills Act into consideration, or were you looking at other findings related to the CPUC, such as the 6 setback, location, height, and all that?
If I could clarify with the commissioner, what administrative review are you referring to?
Well, the motion before us, a resolution based on administrative review, you are asking us to approve the CPUC, right? City attorney just told us that we need to make our judgment based on findings. So I'm trying to determine in your review what factors led to your recommendation of the approval. And that would help to clarify it for me. It's not a trick question. I'm just trying to understand the nature, because I was being swayed more by other commissioners talking about issues of where the jurisdiction lie and some of these other things. I was not convinced by some of the speakers from the neighborhood who had, but appreciate them bringing their comments. And I understand some of the comments made by the members of the historic preservation, but I'm trying now to understand in your review what led you to the conclusion you did in a recommendation.
Thank you for that. Just to be clear, Commissioner, this is not an administrative review. It's a discretionary review. The commission has the final authority to approve, deny, or approve with conditions. The comment I made about the Mills Act, and sometimes there being administrative review authorities that we have as staff, it's just that administrative. There's no discretionary review by a commission, either the planning or historic, and those are very limited to a certain list of changes. So tonight, to be clear, it is discretionary.
So that goes back to Men's first point, that although you guys made a recommendation, it's up to us to decide. And so I'm trying to find among us what is the finding that we're using as a basis of going forward with a motion.
Sure. Staff has provided a complete staff report, and have provided a complete resolution with 5 findings for the commission that, if the commission decides to approve it, could use it as support for approval. If the commission decides to deny the application tonight, you'd have to find or make a finding, one of the 5 findings. Give us direction as to kind of why you feel that it's not meeting the findings, and we can come back with a resolution of denial. So I hope that's maybe clears up your question, Commissioner.
Well, I think the point is we didn't have an HRC consultant review it as required by the Secretary of Interior standards. So we're not
kind of my earlier
experts.
points, if I may, our Chapter 30 does not require this because of the definition of the exterior modifications that I pointed out to earlier. There's no physical changes to the Maharaja House. Some of the public comments made mention that maybe it's a hole in our Chapter 30. I would agree. There's maybe an opportunity to revise that Chapter 30, but that's the Historic Resources Commission's purview. Tonight, it's a land use decision on whether you want to approve a structure that exceeds 15 feet in height. Staff's made a couple findings, 5 findings for approval that have nothing to do with Chapter 30 or historic. Those are enumerated on the resolution.
Can you bring back the slide where you...
Which slide? I don't believe that the 5 findings are on this presentation, but they're on your resolution.
Yeah, page 19 of your PDF. If you downloaded the staff report, that's where it's at.
If it's helpful, I can read out the findings for conditional use permit. The first one, whether for or in opposition of the proposal. The first finding is that the proposed use will provide a service or facility which will contribute to the general well-being of the neighborhood or community. The second finding is that the proposed use will not, under the circumstances of a particular case, be detrimental to the health, safety, or general welfare of a person residing or working in the vicinity. Third finding is the proposed use will not adversely affect the present economic stability or future economic development of properties surrounding the area. The fourth finding is that the proposed use will comply with the regulations and conditions specified in Chapter 41 for such use, and that is the zoning code. And finally, the final finding, number 5, is that the proposed use will not adversely affect the general plan of the city or any specific land applicable to the area of the proposed use. So these are the 5 findings that of which, when you review and either approve or deny conditional use permit, that you articulate the findings under each one of these categories. What has been done is that the staff has been able to provide draft findings for the approval. If tonight the planning commission wishes to, well, the planning commission has several options, is to approve as condition, to deny the project and make articulate findings so that we can help refine and articulate that for a resolution for you to review at a following meeting. Or you can continue the item and provide questions that you would like to have answer, or issues that you would like for staff to further evaluate, and then come back to you with answer those questions for your consideration.
Yeah. Could we take a vote and then give staff direction on possibly coming back as one option, or perhaps the other one is take 2 or 3 of these and put them in the negative? Because I think they're mostly written, for example, the first one is that the proposed use will provide a service or facility which will contribute to the general well-being of the neighborhood or community. And then we could rephrase that to say the proposed use will provide a service or facility which will, okay, it's not that easy, create a detriment to the general well-being of the neighborhood or community. I mean, I think it's to try to wordsmith it here might take a lot of time. And so maybe we could.
What you would do is provide general direction as to the areas of concern, such as compatibility, consistency, how would it potentially impact the existing neighborhood or adjacent properties. But they have to be at a specific level enough to where we can articulate under each one of these categories, or at least in some of these categories.
Just as a clarification, we're not drafting that resolution tonight. We're just getting this direction.
Got it. Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry, is Commissioner Ramos, go ahead.
Yes, if I can ask a question to staff. So when staff was recommending that they preserve the existing trees and then add at least 2 columnar trees, I'm wondering how staff landed on the recommendation of 2.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's just what staff felt was kind of a missing point. If you look at some of the photos that were provided to the commission, there are certain vantage points from heliotrope where you can see that there are mature trees that are covering kind of the proximate location. And then there's a point where you go directly in front of the location, like if you see this photo here to the left, that there's no mature landscaping that would potentially provide anything of similar verticality as a pavilion or screening. So 2 was just something that staff felt would be appropriate. If the commission feels that it's not enough, they are welcome to make a modification to include more landscaping or more trees.
Thank you. And if there was a motion to move forward with the CUP approval, I would be interested in increasing that number of 2.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's appropriate because I feel what I'm hearing is we need some more information regarding scale, appropriate scale, architectural features, some of the clarification we heard in Mills Act and the Secretary of Interior standards in relation to Chapter 30 of our code, because the first time I heard you read that in your presentation, I clearly in my mind, I thought, oh, well, the Secretary of Interior standards would dictate that it needs to be reviewed by HRC. So then subsequently, now we're saying it doesn't. So I think we need to get clarification, further legal clarification on that.
Thank you, Chair. If I could direct you to the presentation, I think this is consistent with the staff report where I do mention that it does not require Historic Resources Commission, or the fact that it's not altering the exterior building of the Maharaja House. That's been consistent with the report and the presentation tonight. And unfortunately, Planning Commission's purview does not fall under Chapter 30. There's no changes to the building. And like I mentioned, I might personally agree with some of the public's opinions that that's probably something that needs to be revised. But as it's currently stated, our Chapter 30 does not allow the Planning or the Historic Commission to review these types of structures unless it's physically altering the exterior of the Maharaja House. That's not the case today. The case today is just a structure that's exceeding 15 feet in height. So what the Planning Commission has to review is only what's allowed as part of the zoning code, not Chapter 30. So we cannot weigh any sort of Secretary of Interior standards or Chapter 30.
But it says the structure is not physically altering or changing the exterior of the Maharaj House, but it is, according to the Secretary of Interior standards. The new structures do impact the historic character of the architecture.
If I may,
isn't that a value system of whether it takes away from an Art Deco property or not, depending on your orientation? This pavilion is.
Sure, can we have one question answered at a time, please? It's a little difficult to follow.
His question.
But I would like his question answered before other questions are asked.
Thank you for your question, Chair. If you look at the definition in Chapter 30 about exterior modifications, it's clearly identified as a physical change to the exterior of a building. Secretary of Interior standards is not something that's codified anywhere in our municipal code. So in your decision to either approve or deny, you cannot use the Secretary of Interior standards if it's not physically affecting the structure. That was what I was trying to kind of clarify with this action today. There's other structures that are affected that go to the commission. This one is not physically affected. There's no exterior modifications, and that's pursuant to the code and the definition.
What our planner is advising is that in your finding, if you are to decide to not sustain the staff's recommendation, is to articulate finding that would address the issues under a conditional use permit and not necessarily under the historic preservation. While we understand it is something that has been brought to the community by the community about this property, it is something that by process and procedure that we should address what's under the CUP. I want to share information, and maybe the city attorney can confirm this, but in order to approve it, you would need all findings to be in the affirmative. But to deny it, you only need one negative finding. So you don't have to make negative findings on all 5. Only one negative finding would be something that would have to be addressed if that's your case. So I think that's something that you can articulate, and we can help draft the language, refine it, and bring it back for you, if that's what you desire.
I would say based on the input we have, it is causing harm. So, I mean, that would be one finding, but I think maybe we come back for a separate discussion on Chapter 30, because looking at the third item there, clearly we are physically altering the Maharaja House based on the Secretary of Interior standards. So I guess we disagree on that.
I think that's something that we can certainly address in the future. And, the issues of the gap in the code language and whether or not it needs to be updated can be a future discussion. Our recommendation tonight is to review this based on the land use aspect of this project and make the finding of what's under here and be able to articulate that, and we can bring it back.
Well, my choice would be to try to move the project forward through the Historic Resources Commission, but it doesn't sound like we can do that. So the only other choice, I think, is to make a finding that it does cause harm to, based on what we're heard here today. And so that item alone would not be satisfied.
If you're referring to causing harm, are you referring to the fact that the structure in terms of its height and massing for an accessory structure is not consistent and compatible with the structures in the neighborhood, and that this would be a defining character that may set a precedent in the area?
Yes. But the Historic Resources Code allows that. So I think the applicant has a path forward through the HRC. Through us, I don't see a path forward. Oh,
Chair, a question.
Yes, sir.
Have we discussed with the applicant on alternative locations on site? Because I think the issue that I'm assuming most of the commissioners had is its visual impact on a historic neighborhood. There doesn't seem to be much issue with the structures in the back. It seems like unless you go out of your way to take a look. So my question is, has there been discussion with the applicant for potential different locations on site if they do wish to proceed to have that structure installed?
Thank you, Vice Chair. We have had conversations with the property owners about a number of different design alternatives. One notable one after receiving concerns from the neighborhood was reducing the height 20 inches, right? Originally 23 feet, 4 inches, now 21 feet, 8 inches. Other considerations were potentially site grading considerations to lower the structure height appearance, relocation of the site further back, maybe behind the structure. For example, the grading issue presented water runoff concerns. The location was a preference for the property owner, so that was not something that they were willing to go with. But that's something that the commission can bring up again if they decided to have approval of the property with modified conditions. They could have that conversation with the property owner tonight.
I tend to agree with staff in the sense that, a lot of stuff that's been brought up is either opinions or quite honestly hearsay that's not really reflective in the analysis that staff has put in front of us. From my perspective, if it's a height issue, then my suggestion would be, to the applicant, if you are insistent on having something of that nature on your site, I think one of your neighbors mentioned that you can somehow reduce that height so that you do not require the CUP, right? Because right now the CUP is in front of us because you exceed that height limit. And so there are options. And if the applicant is willing to explore those options, I'm open to kind of considering those options. But I think from a purely what we're being asked to consider, if it's the issue of height, it seems to me like it complies with the height. Now, it sounds like it's also an issue of aesthetics. That's where I'm not sure if that's within our purview to discuss. And so if the applicant is willing to push the structure back, reconsider location or the height, and I think that would minimize the visual impact on the property, which might alleviate some of the concerns that we're having on the dais today.
The commission is able to look at the height, massing, and design of the structure, but as it relates to historical review and making sure that it goes through that process, that's the distinction that staff is trying to make is that the finding can look at the design aspect of the project and the site and whether or not it's compatible in terms of the height, the massing, even the location. But what we're advising is not to be including issues of the historic process and procedure into your findings.
I'm sorry, you're saying we are excluding findings of historic nature.
Correct. That is within the purview of the HRC.
Yeah. And that's, I guess that's a problem I have is a structure as prominent and important historically to be asked to ignore that. Yes, Commissioner Ramos.
Yes, I'm wondering if we can take an informal straw poll of commissioners to see what the feel would be on adding additional landscape requirements in an attempt to mitigate the visual impact. Just want to see where people are and if that's something that could make a difference.
I would be in favor.
Okay, I would also support that.
Like to, I think I'd rather just like to call for a motion. Do we have a motion regarding this item?
Was that a request to see if there's some other modification that will get us through this? I'm just trying to understand your motion.
I wanted to get an informal feel of where commissioners stand, but I can also just make the motion. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Alderete, did you?
No, look, yeah, I think you ought to just make a motion and then we'll find
Yeah,
out.
I'll
what
just
people
make
are.
the motion then. So I would be interested in, and I'll just say it this way before restating it, in a motion that would amend the resolution to increase the number of trees that staff is recommending. So currently staff is recommending at least 2. I don't know what number, I don't know that I want to recommend a specific number right now. But my intent would be to add enough landscape to change the landscaping and add enough trees to mitigate the visual impact that that people are concerned over. I can hear your condition and consider it.
We have the structure, but it can also be sunken. So it's below the wall structure. By sinking it is additional cost, but by sinking it, you also can create some spaces for table chairs and all that. Because if the intention is to be wing in the room, then you could also have additional place, but it'd be sunken down. But that is costly, and I'm not suggesting it, but.
So can I hear the condition you're recommending, Commissioner?
Well, I don't know, because we didn't talk to the, one of the questions I want to ask the homeowner.
I'd like to move forward with my motion as is, and if it fails, then another motion can be made. Thank you. So I would need a second for my motion to move forward.
Do we have a second?
To approve with.
With additional landscape.
So the motion is to approve it and just add additional landscaping to cover the structure, correct?
Essentially, yeah, I'm not proposing any reduction in height at this time.
Okay, I'll go ahead and second it.
Have any discussion on that? I think my opinion on that is we really need, I think it'd be more appropriate to have the applicant come back to us with a line of sight renderings, just to show, for us to, I don't feel comfortable designing the project from the days. And I think it's more appropriate for the architect to come back to us with a proposal in that regard. And also maybe see some of the ornate carvings they're talking about so we get a better idea of what the structure looks like.
Thank you for the feedback. I'd like to hear Commissioner McLaughlin's comment and then maybe perhaps amend my motion, or I might have to make a new motion. Oh,
No, I mean.
all right, I thought you raised your hand. Okay.
Yeah, no, I just waved my hand like that.
But I think I still am the opinion that it's an incredibly important historic structure. So we need to, it is causing harm to the residents, distress, that it's not being reviewed.
Okay, I'd like to call the question.
Okay.
I believe there is a motion and a second, just to
All right.
clarify, yes.
Roll call vote, Madam Secretary.
Commissioner Aldereti,
No.
Commissioner Calderon,
Aye.
Commissioner McLaughlin,
No.
Commissioner Ramos,
Aye.
Commissioner Wu, Vice Chair Pham,
No.
Chair Morrissey.
No.
Motion has been denied with majority vote.
I'd like to make a motion that we extend this finding or this hearing, that so that, like Chair has mentioned, I think there needs to be more documentation on what that structure will look like on site, especially with Commissioner's comment about the landscaping. I think I would like to see that. Again, we're not going to design the project for the applicant, but if the applicant is very insistent on having a structure like that, I would like to see more documentation that would convince all the commissioners that that's an appropriate decision to be made. So my recommendation or my motion would be to extend this hearing to the next to next date. Right, with condition of having additional materials for us to evaluate.
So your motion is to continue this to the next hearing of the Planning Commission with direction for staff to review and evaluate issues that would help address what has been brought up tonight regarding the height, the visual impact, and potential location, and provide some options,
right,
if possible, with the applicant's input. And the commission then would review it at that point in time.
That's correct. I don't feel comfortable voting on something that the applicant, it's just there's only one option. There's really no input from us, really just a yes or a no. And if this is something that's important to the applicant, then I would like to see staff work with the applicant to explore other options to make it a viable option for us to discuss and vote on.
I think we have enough direction. If that's the motion and there's a second, we will work with the applicant to bring it back to the next meeting.
I'll second.
A question.
Just very quickly, it's very tough for staff to bring the item on the next meeting. It will be more appropriate to allow us at least 30 days to work with the applicant so they have time to submit the additional information that the commission is requesting. If you can make the motion to continue it to 2 meetings from now, that'll be great. Thank you.
So I want to clarify that the direction to staff is to evaluate all options. It relates to massing, height, and screening.
Right, and you have stated from the beginning, this, the historical nature, since it's not the main building that's being affected, that's not under consideration for the CPUC, right? But we've been talking about that all night.
The historic aspect of the primary structure and the relationship is not a part of this. We're talking about the height, the location, and potential option for screening, and that would be something that we would work with the applicant to bring back to the commission for your evaluation in 30 days as the planning manager has requested.
If I could ask a clarifying point for the commission, as the staff that will be bringing this back to the commission, you have any specific changes that you're looking for that, because by suggesting that we come back with alternative designs, you're kind of suggesting that you're willing to approve this if it's on the back, if it's reduced to 18 feet.
Well, I can't speak.
That's
yeah.
not the conversation I've heard today about the concerns or the concerns from the public. It's a lot more about compatibility to the neighborhood. So if I could offer a suggestion in terms of how you could take the findings, make a decision on the findings if you choose to. Finding number 5, for example, is talking about compatibility with the general plan. General plan has policies and goals that talk about character and integrity of existing neighborhoods. That's what that section refers to. So if the commission decides that that section is not appropriate and that you'd like to make a finding that the structure is not consistent in the character and the integrity of the neighborhood, Floral Park, you can make that finding if you wanted to deny this tonight. But I would just advise that if you are going to come back with changes, alternative designs, there's a possibility of approval. So I just haven't heard that today as an option from either the commission or the public. So I just wanted to clarify that. That's all.
Well, I would be in favor of approving it, but not in the location that's specified as of today. My issue with it, and as I hear from the community, is the visual impact, the incompatibility of said structure. And to me, a resolution or a solution to that is the location in a less visible location, as well as a combination of landscaping to screen it. But as it sits now, I would not be supporting it. And that's why I'm asking for an alternative solution, because it seems like I'm not getting a response from the applicant on whether or not they're willing to do that or not. And if it's a hard line no, this is the only location, then, for the record, I would be voting against it. So the only reason why I'm asking for a continued study is because I want to see if the applicant's willingness to relocate the structure. And whether or not he's willing to reduce the height, that's up to him. But my priority is relocating the structure.
Commissioner Brown,
we
you are
have
aware
the
this
applicant
structure
here
is in the
tonight.
backyard. It's not in the front yard.
Right, but it's relatively close to the rear yard, no, the front yard setback, and that's my concern with it.
The structure to the wall,
Right,
because the wall is here and then the front yard is here.
right. My concern is that
The wall in the backyard.
my concern is that of course, the applicant needs to comply with front yard setback. My concern is that it's very in line with the front of the house. Even though it's behind the front yard, the structure itself is very in line with the front of the house, which is why I believe the community is voicing their concern of incompatibility in terms of style, right? My example would be, you can have a modern house with a Japanese garden that's very low to the ground. No one would know it is. Who's to say that it's incompatible with that modern home, right? The only reason why someone would voice an issue of incompatibility if it's visually incompatible. And the applicant's proposed location right now, it's so close to the front yard setback that is visually incompatible. And I feel like that's what the community's issue is with it at the crux of it, right? And so I'm giving the applicant a way to, or an alternative to reconsider the location. If that's not what you wish, then that's fine. But I would like to continue the item so that the applicant has the opportunity to do so.
What I'm hearing from the staff is that some of these options have been discussed. And I think as Pedro stated earlier, that there was the applicant is here, that question can be asked. But what Pedro reminded me is that some of those options were asked.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. And if it comes down to it, the redesign of this really falls out to a couple options, right? Lowering the height of the structure, relocating the structure, or maybe landscaping. That question doesn't need to be, continue that. We don't need to continue that to ask those questions. We have the applicant here tonight with the architect. We can ask those questions. Applicant, are you willing to relocate this so it's not visible? Are you willing to reduce the height? Are you willing to put more landscaping? That's something that the commission can discuss tonight. It does not need to be continued. we can answer that today. And if, they decide to, then the specifics about it, then we can kind of move forward and kind of figure out what the site design would be. Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, you're well within your purview to say no lights as part of the conditions of approval. That's something that could affect land use and light pollution and direct glares to property owners. That's within your right to do. So you can ask that question to the applicant.
Yeah, I think maybe when the applicant was discussing with staff, now that they have the feedback from the commission, they'll maybe reconsider some of those things they didn't want to do previously. I don't think we can design it here tonight from up here. So I'd much rather continue it and have them come back. Yes, sir.
Thank you. So yeah, I think we could probably ask the applicant tonight, because I think what we're doing is we're kicking this down the road. And I think I'm pretty certain I know what the solution isn't. And the solution isn't to make it smaller, because I think this had already been, the structure has already been built. And so it's now a matter of sending it over and stacking it up. So I think the only way you lower this is you go down subterranean. And my guess is you'd probably hit the water table before you would get to the point where it would get below 15 feet. But I appreciate the idea, like, look, hope springs eternal, and you want to try to work something out. But based off the report, the staff report, I think all this has been tried, and my sense is that the rubber's hitting the road here. That's it.
I agree. Can we have the applicant answer these questions?
I do recall speaking with the owner about this previously. He is willing to move the location of the pavilion if that is something that that is asked of him. The height, as mentioned, we already reduced it based on feedback. You are correct; it is already built, but we removed a small ornamental piece at the top, and then also cut some of the posts, or intend to cut some of the posts, so that it still proportionally works, but just isn't quite as tall. So that's how we got the reduction in 20 inches in height. Reducing the pavilion below grade presents a water table issue, but it also presents, I think, just a drainage issue. We're changing the drainage of the height, so we'd have to install area drains, I think, or that's something that just kind of, it didn't seem as expedient, I guess, to do that. But I think out of all options that we're talking about, moving it to a different part of the property, I think is something that my client is absolutely willing to discuss. Or if tonight you wanted to, and if you said, we think that if you move it to this spot and we approve it in that spot, if you say that tonight, I think that is I think the owner is okay with that outcome as well. Again, I understand that you don't want to design from the dais, as you mentioned, but and obviously I would have to check with the owner about an exact spot, but I think that is definitely something that he would be happy to discuss.
I would like to ask about the size, because this is the old structure, and it has no screw and plate or anything. It's just joined by joint and tenon. So if we reduce it, we cannot do it. We cannot do it. This is the whole place. The only thing that we can chop the foot down to about 1 foot, and the top. That's the only thing we can do. And I think that right now the structure is tucked into the bamboo, we have a giant bamboo about 44 feet. So this is just half of the size of the bamboo. Otherwise, if we can plant the same thing, fast growing bamboo, bamboo growing very fast. Only 2 years it grow up to about 40 feet, the giant bamboo. So this is a very special one. I can just plant the bamboo right in front, outside the wall, and in about two years we cover the pavilion. Nobody can see it.
Thank you. So we had a motion on the floor
Right.
to continue. Can you restate the motion, please? And it was said, did Commissioner Ramos second? Was there a second?
All right, I'd like to motion to continue this item with specific items to request from staff to work with the applicant to discuss location, scale, and sorry, I don't remember. Location, scale, and massing of the proposed structure. It sounds like the applicant is amenable to relocating the structure. That's the motion.
I just want to ensure that staff will also be considering additional screening regardless of the location. Thank you.
Okay. Madam Secretary, can you do a roll call vote? Do you have a comment?
Is there a second to that motion?
Well, Commissioner Ramos was the second.
And that will be for the April 25th Planning Commission meeting.
Recommend a friendly amendment that we don't make the continuation date specific in case there, for whatever reason, staff needs additional time.
Or the architect.
Or the architect, yeah.
Because it's just a public hearing, in order to avoid renoticing of the public hearing, it would ordinarily be need to continue to the next, to some finite hearing date.
Okay. I'd like to then just ask the staff if does staff see any issue with that date? Or do you think that everything can happen on time to bring us back what we're asking for?
Did I hear we have to have another public hearing?
In order to avoid that, we need to provide a specific date when this will come back. So staff is right now confirming that that would work or not. I know we'll also be hearing on the housing element soon, so I just want to put that out there.
Why don't we ask for the 30 days as previously discussed, and if we're not able to make that finite 30 days, we can recommend a second continuance. So that would be to April 25th. And we will ask for additional time if we need to, but I think that would provide a date certain.
Okay, is that agreeable?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, my second extends.
Want to restate? Can you restate the motion, Madam Secretary?
I believe that it was to continue for 30 days. Is that clear enough, or do we need more clarity on that?
You need to April 25th.
The motion to continue the CUP to April 25th.
Can staff just restate what will be brought back at that future date, please?
The direction for staff is to evaluate the options of reducing the visual impact of the proposed structure by looking at potential locations, size or scale, massing, and screening, or potentially a combination of all the above. Or if other options available, that addresses those issues. That's what the commission is asking for staff to do. So if you're referring to the finding, and if you don't believe that you can make those findings, even with these changes, then you have the options of not approving. Correct. So in order to approve it, you're going to have to make all affirmative findings for all 5. To deny it, you only need 1.
Okay, Madam Secretary, can we do a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Alderete,
Yes.
Commissioner Calderon,
Aye.
Commissioner McLaughlin,
Aye.
Commissioner Ramos, Commissioner Wu,
No,
Vice Chair Pham,
Aye.
Chair Morrissey.
Aye.
Motion is approved with majority vote.
question? Mr. Mayor, the general plan in terms of aesthetics to the neighborhood, is that subjective or is there a definitive non-value, non-ethnic consideration of what is aesthetically pleasing to a neighborhood? Who decides that value system?
The design policies and direction is provided in our general plan through the various elements that relates to land use and design. And those are the ones that we will use to evaluate that question that you just asked. So the general plan does provide directions and guidance in that sense. And that's what we would use.
So when it comes back to us, the neighborhood is not uniform. It has a variety of different architectural styles there and different types of housing, right?
The neighborhood does have various types of housing and design, correct?
Although there is a strong neighborhood integrity element with a strong neighborhood association operating there, which I do respect and I understand that. Does that set standard?
Neighborhood compatibility, contextual appropriateness is something that is often looked in design. And it's something that could be considered as part of a land use and design aspect of a project.
The trouble I have is that I see flamingos and I see shrines of different types. And, you know, who defines that?
The item has been continued. We
Okay,
didn't
I'm
hear
sorry.
anything about the design. We heard about massing, scale, height, and screening.
Thank you. Thank you. So that concludes the business calendar and we will move on to comments. Are there any staff member comments?
I don't have any this time.
Thank you. Move on to commissioner comments. Are there any commissioner comments? We'll start with Commissioner Alderete.
Yeah, I generally don't make comments, but I just wanted to thank Pedro for his performance. It was really helpful for me to understand this. Thanks.
Commissioner Calderon.
I just want to say thanks to the staff. Presentation was a great topic to bring up. Applicants and community members, thank you for being present, and those who were online. Great discussion today. Also, commissioners, thank you for the questions. It was good.
Thank you. Commissioner McLaughlin.
I just want to say that appreciate everybody's support in the audience and everything else, and look forward to seeing where this takes us at this point in time. But good job, Pedro.
Commissioner Wu. Thank you. Commissioner Ramos.
Yes, also want to say thank you to staff, the applicant, members of the public. Pedro, you did a great job tonight. And also just a side note, in the public comments, one of the letters was addressed to gentlemen. So I just want to make it clear that this commission is not just made up of men. And please be mindful when making public comments. Thank you.
Vice Chair Pham, thank you for that.
Thank you, Pedro, for the presentation. And I would like to say that, Flora Park, I love driving through Flora Park. Everything's well manicured. You know, there's something to be said about the historic nature of the neighborhood. So it's just definitely something it's very pleasant to drive through.
Thank you. Yeah, likewise, thanks to staff for the report and for all the residents of Floral Park and the applicant for giving their input. I also wanted to make a comment regarding the streetcar construction. I think the businesses need a little more help from the county in terms of reducing increasing the foot traffic. A lot of the improvements there that the county is performing are not ADA compliant. So 1 in 7, according to the CDC, 1 in 7 people in the United States are mobility impaired. So because those improvements aren't compliant, we're reducing the amount of customers for our merchants on the street by that much. So I think a lot has to be done there. They're trying to make improvements, but for no additional time, they could do them properly, more carefully. So I sent a letter to the city on that, and they're talking with the county. So I appreciate staff's efforts to help out in that regard. Thank you very much. So we will adjourn to the next meeting on Monday, April 11th at 5:30 p.m.